Star Trek has always been an important part of my life. I've made no secret of that here on this channel. In fact, my mom is a huge fan, and her mom was a huge fan. So even though I don't have any first-hand memories of watching the show first run, the original show, since I'm not old enough, I have this direct connection back to it. In fact, one of my formative memories is going over to my grandmother's house and watching the old Star Trek movies on videocassette. She had the, at the time, definitive 5-movie collection, which was ruined when they released Star Trek VI, which should have been the 5th and final movie instead. In fact, I remember the first time I went over there after she went out and bought the individual cassette of Star Trek VI and getting to sit down and watch it. Not in a lot of detail, but I remember it nonetheless. The feeling that I had when it happened. And that's an important part of who I am. My subsequent love of Star Trek as a franchise began with that show because it began with those women in my life who were fans of it. And so I've always had a special connection, not just to the Star Trek The Next Generation cast, which is the cast that I followed for the first time, first run, but to the original series cast. I've always appreciated them a lot. And I have grieved every single time we have lost one of them. And this last couple of days was no exception. For those who don't know, Nichelle Nichols, who played Lieutenant Nyota Uhura in the original series, the original version of that character, passed away on the 30th of last month. She was 89 years old, and it, based on the reports from her family, happened peacefully enough. So I'm happy at least for that. Her health hasn't been fantastic recently anyway, from what I understand. But it's absolutely heartbreaking that this has happened, regardless of whether it was her time or not, which it seems like it was. It's just such a spectacular loss, because she was a genuinely amazing woman. Among many other fantastic things that she did during her life, above and beyond playing the character, which I will talk about in a moment, she worked with NASA to help recruit some of the first people of color and the first women to their astronaut program ever. In fact, after she started recruiting the first astronaut class following the start of all of that, from what I understand, included the first black man ever in space and the first woman ever in space. Or at least who would become those people in a few short years. And she continued to interact and work closely with NASA for years to come. She was a big part of what they were for a very long time, because they saw the value in her as a trailblazer. Because that's what the character of Uhura was. The original series had female characters in it, some of whom were pretty impressive in their own way. But it came out in the 60s, so it also had its share of sexism. I mean, the franchise still does to this day, to a lesser degree, but I mean, it's always been there. Most of the female characters, the recurring female characters, were like basically the captain's secretary, or they were Nurse Chapel, who, despite having some genuinely cool moments, her main personality traits were assistant to the doctor and in love with Spock. They played roles in the series, and the series made it clear that whether we saw it or not, these women were considered valuable officers on this very professional ship of exploration in space in the far future. But Uhura is really the only character that we ever got to see be that on screen with any sort of regularity, and she got even more to do as the original movies came along. From helping to steal the Enterprise to go try to resurrect Spock from the dead, of course, to performing a barely clothed fan dance to entice a bunch of men away from their guard positions, which, despite being cringy, I remember fondly as a bit of kitsch fun. She also, from what I understand, did a lot of ad-libbing her lines or adding little bits of extra personality to the way that Uhura carried herself in the show. In fact, one of the episodes that she has a bigger part in, Mirror Mirror, an absolute classic, from what I understand, she has an ad-libbed line in that that's pretty great, and I want to watch that episode now just because she did have such a big role in it. But she made history just by being there on the show, in a prominent position on the bridge of this starship in this distant progressive future, because she was a black woman in such an important, visible professional role. In fact, at one point she thought about leaving the show, and Martin Luther King Jr. himself asked her to stay because he recognized how important it was for her to just be visible in this position. This is why I don't understand how some fans now can say that old Star Trek was never political. Just the act of them putting Nichelle Nichols on that bridge set was political. She was an activist just by doing her job. That's a lot of pressure for anybody, and she handled it like a champ. And while she primarily worked the communications station on the original series, in the movies, when her role started to expand a bit as they had time to really focus on all of their characters, at least to a degree, we saw that she definitely had knowledge of other workings of the ship. In fact, she rose in rank over the course of the movies, if I'm not mistaken. And she certainly rose in rank overall because an Easter egg in the second season of Star Trek Picard confirms that she eventually rose to the rank of captain and got her own ship. Like, that didn't happen on the screen, but it did happen. And that's not even the end for the character. There may be more of the J.J. Abrams verse movies with Zoe Saldana as Uhura in our future. We don't necessarily know for sure yet. But she's also in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which I think is a really great show. And while Christine Chapel, that nurse that I mentioned earlier, is also a character in Strange New Worlds, and very clearly they're taking her in a bit of a different direction, giving her more personality and exploring her relationship with Spock, rather than it just being her pining for him. I'm very happy to say that the younger version of Uhura that we see in the show, in Strange New Worlds, at least as far as I'm concerned, she could just slot right in with the original character. So far, everything that we've learned about her has really just served to make the original character more complete, and hence better. So especially right now, when anybody who has any experience with this franchise is feeling the loss of an icon, I recommend checking out Strange New Worlds just to see her iconic character having new life breathed into her in this way. It's worth it. In fact, some fake fans don't even realize that the name Nyota, since it was never spoken on screen in the original series, has been part of the character's legacy since the 70s. And in fact, Nichelle Nichols herself helped give the character that name. Not really one of her greatest achievements, but still, I think, a pretty fun fact. And just like I did recently, dedicating my most recent Yu-Gi-Oh! Review to Kazuki Takahashi after he passed away unexpectedly, I wanted to do something to commemorate this absolutely bonkers, fantastic woman. And while that Picard Easter egg did confirm that Uhura eventually became a captain, one thing that we never got to see her do was take command of the ship, for any reason, despite the fact that she was fully qualified to do so. That is, we never saw her take command of the ship, unless you count an episode of Star Trek the Animated Series, the Lorelei Signal. Now, Star Trek the Animated Series is an unusual beast. It has become something of a meme online, and rightfully so. It's a cartoon from an era where animation wasn't cheap. Well, it was. Good animation wasn't cheap. And most animation was produced even more cheaply than that. It's an absolutely goofy show compressed down to fit in a half-hour time slot rather than the hour time slot of the original series itself. So it tries to tell stories of the same scale with half the time for development. And its position in canon is very nebulous, because there are some episodes that just don't fit. There are some that do and are actually pretty good, but for the most part, it's a dumb show. And while I enjoy it, I understand why others wouldn't. But today, in honor of Nichelle Nichols, I want to talk about an episode of that show, the aforementioned Lorelei Signal, so that we can see how Uhura did in command. Now, to be clear, because the show is goofy, I'm gonna clown on it a little bit. Just fair warning, even though this is a tribute. My presentation's probably gonna pick up a little bit at this point, because all the rest of that was very unscripted. The rest of this, well, it's not exactly scripted either, but I'm drawing from my notes, so it's going to be a little more concise. Probably a little more bearable to listen to, too. So I apologize for that. Moving on, though. The Lorelei Signal opens with the Enterprise being sent to investigate a region of space where, roughly every 27 years, some ship from some local peoples just up and disappears. They get there and they encounter a strange signal, which seems to have a hypnotic effect on all of the men on board. In fact, they hear it as a summons and they see pleasing images in their mind accompanying it, whereas the women just hear it for what it is, a really annoying noise that accompanies the first third of this episode. And while the men don't just completely lose it, they remain at least partially competent through the entire episode, and in fact, play a role in saving themselves from the danger later. They definitely sort of fall off their usual competence level. And so immediately, Uhura, as the only regular female bridge officer, starts to investigate the situation in ways that the men just don't feel compelled to do. She calls on Christine, recognizing that this is a thing that seems to be affecting the men, and enlists her medical expertise to help suss things out. In fact, this episode very much treats Christine like less of a nurse and more of a genuine doctor, a genuine medical professional, more on par with Dr. McCoy himself, which is actually more in line with her portrayal in Strange New Worlds than in the original series. In fact, there are a couple moments in this episode where Christine's portrayal is more in line with that vision of her character than the one from the original show. And I find that fascinating. This is a Starfleet ship, though. Even if Uhura thinks that things are going awry, it's not like she's going to wrestle command away from Captain Kirk right here and now. So she goes along with him, wanting to take the ship to a relatively nearby planet that the strange signal seems to be originating from. And she doesn't even bat an eye when he and Spock and Dr. McCoy go down to the planet with, let's call him Ensign Cannon Fodder, to investigate said planet, since sending 3 of the senior-most officers on the ship down into danger is just something they got up to back then. But she does continue to investigate things, especially when the men seem to grow more and more listless. And eventually she is able to work out with Christine's help that this signal is affecting their minds and could weaken them to the point of death. And so while Kirk and Spock and McCoy and whatever that guy's name was are down on the planet meeting the population of this same woman over and over again, being further hypnotized by them and having their life force drained by these nifty headband things, Uhura straight up takes command of the ship. She logs it and everything. She effectively commits a mutiny. A justifiable one. But, I mean, seriously. She even says she accepts full responsibility after the fact. And even though, for the most part, the men are able to take initiative, eventually they're able to wrestle their faculties back enough to take initiative to start rescuing themselves. If Uhura hadn't taken command of the ship when she did, they might not have gotten the all-female security party that they needed to properly rescue the men down to the planet in time to save them from the life-draining properties of this place. We even get to see her kick a little bit of ass when she and the all-female security team beam down and just start shooting people. Like, I was kind of hoping, when I realized this is where the episode was leading, that we'd get to see her deliver some Shatner-esque judo chops or something. But clearly the animation budget for this show doesn't allow for that much movement. As you can see from the clips I've been showing so far, the entire image shakes around more often than these characters actually move on screen. But overall, this episode, which is silly, it's about a population of pretty white women luring men to their planet so they can vampire drain them of their life force, does a really good job of showing these characters in a competent light, despite the fact that most of them are having their minds diddled. And Uhura in particular is shown very favorably here. She is treated by this goofy narrative as the professional she is, and even after the situation is resolved, she helps spearhead all further interactions with this population. Now, there's definitely some goofy moments in this episode, like this scene here that made me laugh out loud.
Obstruct them!
And just in general, the plot of the women, it calls to mind other Star Trek episodes, like The Planet of Pretty White People. Calls to mind, oh god, what was it called? The episode with The Planet of Pretty White People from the first season of TNG, which is one of the worst seasons of television, hands down. And the plot of women luring men from other cultures to their planet so they can, in one way or another, have their way with them, leading to their deaths, calls to mind Favorite Son, a particularly lackluster Voyager episode with a really nonsensical villain plan. But while I can't forgive this episode for being in any way similar to a first season TNG episode, it at the very least does make more sense than that Voyager episode where those women evolved on their home planet to have to lure aliens to their planet to mate with them, which just does not make any sense. But here, these women came from another planet. They came here and colonized this place with their men, not realizing that this planet had this life-draining effect on people. And while the women adapted, the men didn't, and now, even though these women are effectively immortal, they have to replenish their life force every 27 years, or they will die. And as for why they didn't just use one of these hypnotized crews to take them to another planet, I guess we can assume that because they adapted to this place, they're kind of dependent on it now, so they can't leave.
A crew of women will bring a ship back. You'll be transported to the first suitable planet.
A life of hope. New learning. Perhaps love.
Oh. Well, never mind. I guess they're just really stupid. But still, the plot of this one is more thought out than some other episode plots in Star Trek. I thought it was pretty good, is what I'm saying. Silly, but no more silly than some of the sillier episodes of the actual original series. Like another Uhura episode where she has her mind erased and has it restored, including all of her personality and memories, by looking at, like, school tapes, basically, for the duration of the episode. Like, we can agree that this episode's smarter than that, right? Granted, like a lot of episodes of Star Trek the Animated Series, like the one with the giant clone of Spock, for example, because that is actually a thing. This episode's more of a novelty than anything else in the grand scheme of Star Trek as a franchise. But right now, if you're really feeling like you need to celebrate the life of an absolutely spectacular person, I do recommend checking this one out. I think you'll get something out of it. I think there's some things that are genuinely likable about this one, like that aforementioned stuff with Christine. She seems to have a much more real connection with Spock here, since he's able to send her telepathic messages, which inadvertently does a little bit to bridge the gap between her characterization in these old shows with her current characterization now. Even the use of the transporter to restore the men who had their life force stolen is in line with stuff we've seen elsewhere in the franchise. And I think it's put to good use here. And also, holy shit, Ensign Cannon Fodder survived. I'm surprised. I don't know how to end this video. I put in my notes, come up with an ending. God, I hate past AJ a lot right now. What can I say? What can I say? Obviously, I didn't know Nichelle Nichols personally. But God, am I going to miss her so much. I have not finished grieving yet. And after about a week there of an entirely unplanned channel hiatus, I don't want to talk about other shows right now. I'm gonna anyway, because I want to get my schedule going again. But I might, when we get back to my regular Star Trek reviews, decide to forego reviewing whatever episode I was supposed to review next. I don't remember. And talk about an episode where Uhura was prominent in the actual original series instead, or something. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But yeah, it was a tragedy, and the world will never be the same. We as a people have been diminished by her loss. What more could you say than that? I guess I'll end this off by asking, first of all, please share the video. I'd like to share my love with as many fans of the show as I can. But also, head down into the comments and tell me, what are some of your favorite Uhura moments? I would be genuinely delighted to hear what you guys have to say. But in the meantime, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.